Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.
Sam, get the DA's office and get a warrant for Brown's arrest.
Take a look at Joe McCloy here. Used to be my boss. Now I'm his. What's the difference between me and him? We breathe the same air, sleep in the same hotel. He used to own it. Now it belongs to me. We eat the same steaks, drink the same bourbon. Look, same manicure, same cufflinks. But there's only one difference. We don't get the same girls. Why? Because women know the difference. They got instinct. First is first and second is nobody.
Thought maybe we could go dancing.
I've been dancing, Lieutenant. Furthermore, you haven't been around here for 6 months. And furthermore, if you want a date, do what the others do. Call me first. A week in advance.
I'm trying to run an impersonal business. Killing is very personal. Once it gets started, it's hard to stop.
He was very insistent.
What was the name again?
Alicia. My name is Anna Lee Jackson.
Are you sure you never took an ocean voyage?
Well, if I had, I certainly would have remembered.
Kill him tonight, not tomorrow. Mr. Brown will be dead soon enough. The boys will take care of him for his long double cross. But if we do it now fast, we'll save a lot of people a lot of trouble.
You should have hit me back. You haven't got the hate.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Jedidiah Ayres.
First is first, and second is nobody.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Brian Hoyle.
Good evening.
We kick off Noirvember 2019 with a look at Joseph H. Lewis's The Big Combo, written by Philip Yordan. The film stars Cornel Wilde as Lieutenant Leonard Diamond. He's a cop with a soft spot for Susan Lowell. She's the main squeeze of Mr. Brown, played by Richard Conte. Diamond and Brown play a strange game of cat and mouse as Diamond seems to pursue justice while Brown is a psychopathic thug who thinks he's anything but. Of course, we're going to be spoiling this movie and a lot of its twists and turns, so if you don't want anything ruined for you, turn off the podcast now and go watch it. So, Brian, when was the first time you saw The Big Combo, and what did you think?
Oh, God, I would have first seen The Big Combo when I was at university and studying American film of the 1950s. Obviously, we watched a lot of film noir. Joseph H. Lewis's name came up a couple of times. I saw Gun Crazy first, loved it, and then checked out The Big Combo, which I'd read was his masterpiece, and I think it still is. And after that, I became very interested in Lewis's work, watching as much as I could, really. And as much as I've liked some of his earlier films, things like My Name is Julia Ross or So Dark the Night. I mean, very interesting B-movies. I keep coming back to this one. I think this really is a spectacular piece of not just noir, but really stylish, classic Hollywood filmmaking.
How about you, Jetta?
You know, I'm not really sure when I first saw it. It was probably about 15 years ago, right around the time my first child was being born. I remember I went to the library and just stocked up on all the old movies I could. I just was so sleep deprived to just watching movies constantly. And I think I probably saw it then, but you know, frankly, it's lost in the haze of I think for years I probably had it and The Big Heat confused. Over the last couple of years, I've revisited a lot of those movies that I first saw then, and they're more distinct in my mind now. But it was probably about 15 years ago, and I probably needed about 15 hours of sleep to make any sense out of anything.
That's interesting that you were getting this and The Big Heat confused because, spoiler alert, next week I talk a lot about The Big Heat when we're discussing The Reckless Moment. But also I noticed in one of the articles about The Big Combo that the author kept referring to things in The Big Heat. So I don't think there's any fault of yours in confusing the two because there are some similarities, especially the whole Diamond Brown dichotomy is very similar to the two, the straight edge cop and the villain of The Big Heat as well. I think, like you, Brian, I saw Gun Crazy. I think I saw that in college, and then I want to say, well, I probably saw The Big Combo in college as well. And I saw this one specifically because of two things. One, my desperate attempt to track down all things Quentin Tarantino and the whole thing of Mr. Brown, and Mr. Brown being his name in Reservoir Dogs. And then the other thing was reading about the torture sequence with the hearing aid, which we will talk about a lot more, which also seemed to play into some of the Reservoir Dogs connection as well. So this one was really easy to find for a long time. It still is. I have this on... Gosh, I think I've got this on like regular DVD a couple times. Always looking for like a really good version of it. And then finally Arrow Academy put it out on Blu-ray, over in the UK. And that transfer is gorgeous. And that has some really great extras on there, including the Czar of Noir doing the, commentary for it. That is fantastic.
Yeah, I think it went into the public domain for quite a long period, hence the proliferation of kind of slightly ropey copies of it that were easy to see but not very good.
Yeah, because right now you can go out on YouTube or archive.org or so many different places and track down a copy of this really easy, but it's not going to look nearly as good as that Arrow Academy transfer, because I was surprised when those titles come up, it almost looked like they were jumping into my living room. The print was so clear. And I gotta say, that opening, man, that jazz combo that is playing, it is swinging, man. This movie is great that it has more of a jazz score than an orchestral score. And that opening with the scenes of the city and the music playing. And I was really surprised to see that this is The Big Combo by Philip Yordan. His name is right there on the title page. That was very surprising to see.
As a writer, I'm really happy to see that, of course. But as a writer, I'm also a little chagrined to hear about his reputation for stealing credit and things like that. So, but then as a writer, I'm also very happy for him for that kind of hustle. So I've got very mixed emotions about seeing that up there.
Yeah, there's one thing to be a front for blacklisted writers. There's another thing to actually put your name on stuff, try to sell it, and then take the credit when maybe you weren't doing that as a favor to a friend.
He's a fascinating fellow from the sound of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we talked a lot about him when we did the episode on The Chase. I think that was either last year or the year before. And The Chase has got another one of those just kind of wild narratives, and especially the whole idea that the chase kind of starts again at the end of the movie. It's one of those that I was absolutely floored when I saw that. And then this movie was kind of the same thing. I really couldn't believe a lot of times what I was seeing, and I was so happy to see this. I can't say that this is one of my favorite films noir, but it definitely has its moments that puts this up near the top for me. I mean, it is, it kind of reminds me of like The Mac, where The Mac has so many good scenes. It's not necessarily the best movies overall, but there are scenes that I will talk about and remember for the rest of my life.
Yeah, anything John Alton is shooting is gonna stick there, especially if you're a film noir fan. So many images from The Big Combo specifically that may survive longer than the film itself.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you are going to know images from The Big Combo. Even if you haven't seen this film, you're going to know those last few minutes of the movie. You're going to see that image and go, oh, wow, I've seen that before. Or some of these opening images when the Susan Lowell character is introduced and her running down this hallway from this fighting arena. Those shots are just, oh, my God, everything looks so good in this movie.
Alton probably is the definitive noir cameraman. And in a lot of ways, I think it's not just Alton that makes this, though. It's Lewis. Lewis has an incredible compositional eye. And I think the combination of the two of them really is what makes this kind of extraordinary. And yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know how much the script is by Yordan. I don't think, like any Joseph H. Lewis film, I don't think the best thing about this is the writing. This is a film that you're going to take away scenes from, certainly, but yes, images from, and ideas, quirky ideas that other filmmakers wouldn't have done, like the Brian Donlevy's death scene, where the sound just cuts. and the whole thing's just illuminated by the flash of a Tommy gun muzzle. I mean, that's incredible. Not normal, it's the same. It's the same kind of Joseph H. Lewis quirk that you get at the end of Terror in a Texas Town, his last feature film, where Sterling Hayden has a showdown in the street. It's like the end of High Noon, except Sterling Hayden doesn't have a gun; he has a harpoon. You get those moments in Lewis films, and you don't find them in a lot of other Hollywood films of the period. He was very much the kind of iconoclast, I think.
This movie has definitely made me want to see more Joseph H. Lewis stuff, because especially watching some of those extras and seeing that image from Terror in a Texas Town, I had never seen that before. And seeing Sterling Hayden there with that harpoon, I was like, oh my God, I have to see this movie now. This looks amazing.
It's very good. Yeah.
It's one I saw in the last few weeks, just getting ready for this. It was definitely one of my favorite of the Lewis films I saw. And I gotta say, I watched a lot of his early westerns and the East Side Kids kind of serial, or not serials, but I don't know what you call those hour-long films that he did with the recurring cast of characters. And they were very, I don't know, there wasn't a lot about him that I thought was worth talking about, but he really seemed to kind of come to a head here with nearer the end of his career, from what I saw.
Are those Bowery Boy movies?
East Side Kids, anyway. I don't know if Bowery Boys, I think, is a slightly different group, but similar.
It's sort of pre-Bowery Boys, but maybe post Dead End Kids. It's kind of in the middle. I think there's overlap in characters and casting, but you've got the Dead End Kids in things like Angels with Dirty Faces, and then they become the East Side Kids, and then I think out of that they become the Bowery Boys. He's making some kind of quickie, as you say, sort of hour-long-ish movies with them in probably the late 30s, early 40s. And his early stuff is maddeningly routine.
He's got like 8 film credits in 1940. And,
it's crazy.
3 or 4 of them are those, and then several Westerns.
And I know when he talked to Bogdanovich, he was pretty proud of Gun Crazy. That, he said, was his favorite film. And even when Bogdanovich asked for his second favorite film, he also said Gun Crazy. So he knew that he had some real dynamite there. I think, though, that The Big Combo is up there. I think that it is maybe not as strong as Gun Crazy, but there are some really inventive things. And like you were saying, that combination of he and his cinematographer, just holy cow, just they really were doing something special here. And I do want to talk about, we've used the term combo for him and his cinematographer. I want to talk about what The Big Combo is, because it took me a long time to figure out what they were even talking about with this name. It was that thing that you did with Films Noir, which was to add the big for it. I mean, we talked about that with John Pace's The Big Crime Wave, as opposed to Sam Raimi's Crime Wave, or Crime Wave from earlier with Sterling Hayden. So there were a couple things that I was thinking might have been the big combo when it came to this. One of them was the music, because when you talk about music, you talk about a jazz score, you talk about people being in a combo. One I thought was the boxing. And I love that they kind of do a freak out with us here when it comes to the boxing, that they set this movie up as if it was going to be a boxing movie. We start in a boxing arena. We have a boxer. We have Mr. Brown talking to this boxer. Okay, we're going to have, the left-right combo kind of thing. Nope. From what I understand, it's the combo of Mr. Brown being both a money lender and a savings type guy. He's almost like his own financial institution.
Well, it seems to be when Cornel Wilde is first talking, he's getting chewed out for spending $18,000 in the last 6 months investigating Mr. Brown. He calls Mr. Brown's organized crime. He basically refers to organized crime as the combination. The combination's getting bigger and bigger all the time, and so I took it to be his referring to organized crime, which I think is really interesting. I've never heard it referred to as the combination any other time, but before it was referred to commonly in films as the mob or the mafia, it was the Racket a couple of times, and the Syndicate, the Outfit, and I don't know if there are any other examples of it being called the Combination, but that seemed to be what Cornel Wilde is calling it.
That's definitely, I'd echo that. I mean, it's never said in the film, and to be honest, I'm glad. I always get suspicious when films titles are directly spoken in a film, but I've always seen it as being kind of, the big syndicate, but they went for something a little bit shorter and catchier, and it really just means the mob outfit that Richard Conte's character runs in the film.
As a title, I do think it works in all the ways Mike was saying that with the strong jazz stuff, and the boxing motif, Richard Conte talking about always pitting himself against other men. That speech he gives about you gotta hate him, gotta go in there and hate him until you see red, and that's what the girls will come tumbling after.
The whole Cornel Wilde thing too, when he's talking to his boss, he starts talking about, we got to find the treasurer and all this. And I'm thinking again, this is going to be a whole different movie. Like, we've set up the boxing thing. We set up the treasurer thing. I keep thinking of the Untouchables, where they're trying to find the money man. And I'm just like, it's going to be this kind of movie. And then he is also talking about the Susan Lowell character, and his boss is like, you're in love with her. And so I'm thinking again, this is a different movie. And then eventually we find out, no, he's never even met her before. Somehow he is infatuated with her from afar. He's almost like a stalker character when it comes to Susan Lowell. And I'm not exactly sure why he's so obsessed with her, other than that she is the property of Mr. Brown. And he seems more obsessed with Brown than he does with anything else.
I was too. I was very puzzled about that. I thought maybe when we get to know Lowell, she's so kind of doped up a lot and out of it. For a while, I thought maybe she'd just forgotten him. They used to know each other, and she'd been, several years of heavy drug and alcohol use and had forgotten him. But no, it appears that they'd never met before. And I do think his obsession with her is probably more his obsession with Brown directed in another way, which seems to be some kind of a theme throughout the movie. Brown, spoiler, he's had another woman before, he had a wife, and now he's, because of his obsession with her and her not being impressed with him, that's why he climbed the ladder of the organization in the first place, and took the place at the top, and now he's he's got this woman. And then you got the Mingo and Fonte stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into. But there seem to be these weird diversions of probably sexual interests coming from other sorts of competition. And I think Lowell kind of feels that way about him too. She says she loves him in one scene, and then in the same scene says she hates him. Weird sort of diversions, bouncing off, going different crazy directions with affection and sexual obsession.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of go with that as well. But in some respects, I've always kind of equated Cornel Wilde's character's relationship with, I'm trying to remember the girl's name, with the Susan Lowell character. It's Susan Lowell's character is kind of being like the central romance in Otto Preminger's Laura. Because for the first half of that film, Dane Andrews has never met Laura, and he still becomes kind of obsessed with her, even thinks she's dead. There's an element of that as well, that these kind of lonely film noir cops become so obsessed with their case that they can't kind of disentangle, romantic interest with just kind of investigative interest. I think there's a sort of element of that as well.
In a movie that is so rife with quote-unquote sexual perversion, I keep thinking that he actually has a crush on Brown and that he wants to be with him more than he wants to take him down. It feels almost like a sexual obsession with him, and he's more projecting onto Susan Lowell. That might be stretching it a little bit, but then when you look at the Fante and Mingo relationship, or you look at Mr. Brown and Susan and the whole scene where he goes down on her, and we'll talk about that more later. I mean, there's some weird stuff going on in this movie, so I would not be surprised if there was kind of more of a romance that he wants to have with Brown, let's say.
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for that. And I think, is it possible that that there were several different versions of this script, and I understand it was kind of a cheap budget, was, they just not real clear about dotting the I's and crossing all the T's, and was there some weird overlap? I mean, I know Yordan was supposed to be really good as a script fixer and things like that, but when Diamond is talking about his obsession with taking down Brown, the hypothetical he gives is that you let him open these gambling joints, and he says 4 high school kids are going to go in and get in hock to this bookie, and they're going to get desperate and get a gun and go do a robbery, and something's going to go wrong. They're going to kill a gas station attendant, and then I'll have 4 kids on trial for first-degree murder. And that's actually the plot, the explicit plot of another Yordan script that came just a couple of years later, 4 Boys and a Gun, came in 1957, just a couple of years after this. So I wonder how many bits from how many different scripts are bouncing around in here, and are some of these things we're hung up on, are they just kind of inconsistent, belong to different versions?
Yeah, I mean, that's very possibly true. It's kind of hard to say unless you actually get to see, the multiple drafts as they progress. But I mean, I'm kind of with Mike here. I say, I think Fanti and Mingo are definitely the first kind of homoerotic couple of hitmen that I've come across in a Hollywood movie, sort of chronology-wise. And you get ones later, and things like Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, or possibly Don Siegel's version of The Killers. And there is a lot of perversion or sexual obsession in Lewis's films in general. I mean, So Dark the Night is about someone whose sexual obsessions basically make them schizophrenic. My Name is Julia Ross has a lot of that. Gun Crazy is about as Freudian a film as you'll ever see, and is really, the surrealists would kind of embrace that as a film about l'amour fou. Yeah, he's obsessed with Richard Conte. Cornel Wilde's obsessed with Richard Conte in a way that's more than just professional. And for me, it's yes, it could tip into the kind of slightly sexual, but it also looks forward to the relationships you get in, the kind of cat and mouse cop gangster thrillers of Jean-Pierre Melville, or even later on a film like Heat, the Michael Mann film. So it's where again there's an element, is Al Pacino really just obsessed with Robert De Niro on a professional level, or is there more to it than that? So I think there is an element of this in the film. All within a very strict obedience of the Hays Code, though, which is what makes it so interesting. It's all implication, and you can take it or leave it.
This was the same year, too, where Jack Elam, I believe, if memory serves, we talked about Kiss Me Deadly a few years ago, and there was a weird homosexual overtone to his relationship with the other gangsters that he was running with. And then I can't remember, you mentioned Don Siegel, I can't remember when the lineup was, but my God, that relationship in there was that was almost overt, as close to overt as you could possibly get at that point, I think.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Those Eli Wallach and was it Barrymore? Was it Barrymore?
I think you might be right, yeah.
Okay. Well, they were, so much the heart and soul of that movie. That was, it's so gross.
Oh, yeah. Well, in that weird, stabbing one guy in the back, and it just felt so much like it was penetration. I mean, it's just so many good things. I like where you're coming from with this whole idea of these might be other script ideas floating around, because there's a lot of things that are going on in this movie that we never see. I mean, this whole idea of Mr. Brown having formerly been a prison guard and then somehow got involved with the racket. And it's like, well, that could be a whole movie unto itself. Or this idea of Mr. Brown usurping this Luigi character who we never see, who has been killed off screen forever ago. That could be a whole other movie unto itself. And it's just, there's so many things that are going on in here that we are really just listening in on, and we're these observers hearing these stories and trying to figure out what's truth and what's fiction. And I always wonder, how did Brown go from a prison guard to being the top, the capo de capo of this crime syndicate?
Yeah. Well, his kind of usurping of Brian Donlevy's character as well is that's another film.
Yeah, and it feels like Dunleavy is some sort of weird cuckolded man, and he's got the hearing aid that it just kind of symbolizes that he isn't 100% of a man, and the way that he tries to convince Fonte and Mingo to cross Mr. Brown, but Mr. Brown, I don't think he's ever really scared. I think he knows all the time that Fonte and Mingo are always going to be on his side. Even when he double crosses them, it feels like, okay, yeah, I'm done with these two now, but they have always been my guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he tries to convince Fancy and Mingo to do, he says, I'm going to teach you how to be men.
Their relationship is just so terrific. I mean, when they're almost on the lam, and I think it's the Lee Van Cleef character is like, they're going to be looking for us in every closet. I was like, oh, wow. And then when the other one says, I can't swallow any more salami, I was just like, man, this scene, come on, this is fantastic.
What I'm worried about is getting out of this hotel. The cops will be looking for us in every closet.
Can I just say how much it throws me when they say his name Fanti? I always want to say Fonte because I think of John Fonte, the author, who I always assumed, I guess I never really heard it pronounced, but I remember reading, before I knew who John Fonte was, I read a Charles Bukowski book where he referenced Fonte. He had two characters, they were like cops on his trail, and they were named Fonte and Dante. And I thought that was great. So I always assumed that they rhymed, Fonte and Dante, but now I heard Fanny, I heard Fanny, and then I saw how it was spelled. I said, really? Is that how it's pronounced?
I kept hearing Fanny the whole time.
Yeah, I kept hearing Fanny as well.
And for you, that's got more meaning than it does for me.
It certainly does, yeah.
A fanny refers to a very intimate area of a female.
That could be intentional for, as we've talked about the character and his relationship to... I think he's supposed to be the bottom. That there's that scene where they're sleeping in beds next to each other, and supposedly the pajamas they're wearing are just one pair of pajamas. He's Van Cleef's wearing the bottoms, and Mingo's wearing
the top. Yeah.
I get really into the idea of, this is just what kind of nerd I am. I love the idea of graphic movies. So I always picture this movie as having Susan Lowell at the center, having Brown and Diamond on either side. And then each one of them seem to have, a woman who might be from the past. So we've got Rita on Diamond's side. We've got Alicia on Brown's side. We've got two men, Fanti and Mingo, on Brown's side. We've got Sam Hill, who's played by Jay Adler, and then Captain Peterson, who's the Robert Middleton character. And then you could even, if you want to extend it out too, we've got Bettini on one side being found by Diamond, and then Niels Dreyer on the other side, who he's looking for. And it's just like this whole, I don't know, like I said, that's the kind of nerd I am, where I really like to have this comparison of all these different characters and just having these relationships in the way that they mirror one another.
So we've been talking about the script having its kind of interesting, unexplored alleyways. There is quite a lot of symmetry to it. I think if you look at the films that Lewis makes, generally speaking, you're not saying that the screenplays are their best attributes, but this, next to Gun Crazy, is the best script he ever worked with. I think that's a pretty fair assumption. I mean, you look at the scripts of the other films, they're pretty ropey. And, Lewis has to do everything in his powers to make the films interesting and evocative visually. Here, he's got a script that has a good architecture to it. It does combine a lot of interesting backstory into 90 minutes. I mean, if you think about Susan Lowell's character, I mean, there's this whole second story and career she has as a classical pianist, which, the film kind of brings in, and then it doesn't drop. It's interesting because Richard Conte, who presents himself, his character presents himself as kind of being so suave and sophisticated right before the infamous scene where he goes down on her, he tells her to turn off the music because in a way it's, he almost perceives that kind of level of culture as a sort of threat. Here's something that she understands that I don't, and that, I have to get rid of this. And he insists she turn off the music. But I was like, there's that other story there. But the script is, I think, of a really solid piece of work. It's not one of the greatest noir scripts. It's not the sweet smell of success, but it's still really good stuff.
Am I the only one who Rita acts Lowell off the screen? I mean, I really want. I'd be a Rita guy myself. I don't know what the attraction to Lowell is really.
I think obviously it's she's married to Cornel Wilde. And the actress, obviously, Gene Wallace, is married to Cornel Wilde. And they basically, their production company produced the film. Oh God, what's the? At the beginning, it says it's a co-production between two companies, one of which is Theodora, and Theodora Films is basically Cornel Wilde and Gene Wallace's company, and this was their first independent production. So, in a way, it's it's the producer's wife, so she gets top billing. But I don't disagree with you. I actually think that the actress playing Rita, Helene Stanton, yeah, she is probably the stronger actress. I would definitely agree with that. You're not wrong there. And of course, there's that film noir dichotomy between the kind of the cool blonde and the more kind of affectionate dark-haired girl. But yes, she's not the strongest link in the cast.
But I think the character is more appealing too.
True.
That's all. They're both kind of fallen women, which is maybe different for, usually when you got a blonde and a brunette, you got, the good girl and the experience, but they're both kind of fallen women in this, in the film psychology. One maybe started higher, Lowell was a concert pianist and all that. She had some high culture, but now she's a lush and a junkie and likes oral sex. Whereas Rita, she was as far as we know, always a burlesque dancer, born doing it, but quite comfortable with it and owns it. And anyway, there's not that sort of separation between them that you often get, and I just think the Rita character is a lot more appealing.
Well, I don't want to be too catty, but Gene Wallace's hair in this movie, that is not doing her any favors. She needs to do something with it because she's got this beautiful head of blonde hair and it just looks so limp and greasy throughout so much of this that it's sometimes, and again, being catty, it's almost difficult to look at her because I'm just like, girl, you need a makeover.
I wonder how much of that is Alton, because he's got her lit, in that first shot where Fanny and Mingo catch up to her. The shadow, they're standing in this pool of light, the three of them, and there's so much dark shadow, and the shadow is perfectly matched to the hemline or the bust line on her dress, and her dress is so black and the shadow is so black. She's got that white hair and that white skin and that black dress, and it. So I wonder if that's Alton's influence, just saying, no, I want as much contrast as possible.
That could very well be, because you can't get that kind of silhouette that you're going to get in that famous ending shot unless that hair is kind of taken down a little bit. But yeah, I agree with you as far as I would really like to know more about the Rita character. And I feel terrible that she gets dispatched so easily. And it kind of becomes now it's personal for Diamond, even though it was already personal. And it rings false to me. It feels like he kind of threw her away before and is okay throwing her away now that she's a corpse.
It's the one moment of really, spending the city's money on this apparently, useless task that nobody really wants him to accomplish. Doesn't seem to bother him. And, hauling in 96 guys on, false pretenses and doesn't bother him. And, all kinds of stuff doesn't bother him. But when she's killed, it really gets to him. And it's, I think, probably Wilde's best moment in the whole movie is when he's reacting to her death. So maybe he moves on from it too fast, but it's one of the real emotional moments for me. Because, like I said, the Lowell character doesn't bring that out of either one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he does kind of recover a bit quickly, but this is the nature of the kind of the B-movie world we're in. We don't have time. The narrative is always moving forward at such a pace, really, that times for funerals and grieving and introspection doesn't really kind of enter into it. It is probably Wilde's best moment as an actor, and I think he does convey that kind of emotion. But for a man like him, who's supposed to be this kind of, I suppose, man of action, the best way to kind of mourn her is to get Richard Conte, really. But in a way, I mean, I guess you're right. It's kind of like the femme fatale character, there's not really a fatale in this in a way, but the sort of film noir heroine has been bifurcated between two characters here. And I think if you put the better attributes of both of them together, you probably end up with Gloria Graham in The Big Heat, who to me is kind of definitive in that respect. But that's a story for another time. As you say, talking about mid-50s film noir, but even ones with just the word big in the title is a thesis in its own right.
Thinking about Jay Adler, who plays Detective Sam Hill, and I was very surprised that they didn't play up his name, because I'm just used to, what in the Sam Hill's going on here kind of thing, and I don't know if his name's supposed to be a joke or not, but anyway, I forgot his character in 99 River Street is very much a dandy, and there could be some strangeness to his relationship as well, and I love his face. This guy's got just an amazing face, and I love that he's kind of hanging out in these earlier scenes before we realize that he's a detective and before we realize his relationship with Diamond. I just love that he's this mysterious man in the background that we see in several of these shots. And he's the one that picks up Susan's purse when she drops it at the club when she's trying to commit suicide. The other thing that's interesting, talking about the pace of the movie, is that this thing is 87 minutes long, and the script that's provided on the Blu-ray is 126 pages. So it's like, I know things were cut, obviously. We see Whit Bissell's name in the opening credits, but he's nowhere to be seen. He allegedly plays a doctor in this. So probably in this hospital scene with Susan, there was more to it. But really, I read the script, and it didn't feel like there was much missing. It just feels like they moved it along very, very quickly. So talking about no time to grieve, there's no time to breathe in this screenplay, just because it has to move so quickly in the final version of it.
That's the art, is making something move that fast without feeling rushed. The modern movies, I complain a lot about how long so many of them are, but then when I see shorter films often, I'm like, God, they feel just like they're rushing it. But when I watch something like this, I don't feel it's rushed. We've talked about how many different movies there are, how everybody's got a story in this, and it is, a lot of expositional dialogue and things like that. Another Yordan script that's very high melodrama and things like Johnny Guitar. How many different stories are in that? But it doesn't feel rushed. I mean, it's a different style maybe of filmmaking, but it works for me.
I think it has a lot to do with Lewis as well as a director, is that the key word for me when you're thinking about Lewis is style. I mean, some people say it's style over substance. I don't quite agree, but it's style. And he has this incredibly economical style. He's, in his own way, you could compare him to someone like Robert Bresson, this kind of idea that he never shows you anything that isn't absolutely necessary, and he just gets you the information that you need from that scene hits the right beats, the right, emotional beats or plot beats, and then moves you on to the next one. And the next scene is the next scene that's absolutely necessary. Anything that's fat is cut out. When you watch the first scene with Cornel Wilde, so after the boxing scene, after the sort of, foot chase at the beginning, Cornel Wilde's in his office and Captain Peterson comes to see him. And you would expect, Captain Peterson comes in, Cornel Wilde's back is to the camera. You'd expect Peterson to come in, sit down, and then the editor to cut to a reverse angle where you look over Captain Peterson's shoulders at Cornel Wilde playing Lieutenant Diamond. It never happens because Lewis never shot the reverse angle. He shoots the whole thing from that side of the room. The first time you see Cornel Wilde's face is when he turns around in his swivel chair to pour himself a cup of coffee, and Lewis basically shoots it. I think it's about 3 takes. The close-ups are of things like tape recorders or of objects. There's one close-up of Cornel Wilde, very quick one. They're of objects, not people. Right? The amount of coverage he shoots is really spare. Everything he does is just pared to the bone, and that goes for the storytelling as well. And it moves at such pace. It's incredible to watch, actually, as you say, especially in the context of modern films that feel overlong and overstuffed. This had tons in it, but it's short and well stuffed.
I wonder if that technique that he does employ throughout this film of the long takes, the scenes in long takes, I wonder if that keeps it from feeling rushed somehow. And I don't remember if it was on the commentary for this or if it was in a documentary about John Alton, but Lewis did say that Alton, provided so much advice. Maybe he was being friendly when he said advice, or maybe maybe Alton
suggestions.
Maybe Alton really kind of took control of this, but Alton. They talked about how fast he worked. He would light a whole scene with a single source of light.
Yeah.
He'd just like throw a lamp on the ground or something and boom, it's lit. But because he would light it that way and because it looked so fantastic, he basically controlled the blocking and things like that. And so, it was very orchestrated for these long single takes. And I wonder how much that helps it not feel rushed.
I think that's certainly part of it, but I'll have to leap to Lewis's defense here. I think he finally found in Alton a cameraman who was fast enough for his way of shooting, who could also make it look as good as Lewis's films, kind of cinematography-wise, as good as they always should have. But in terms of things like the blocking and doing things in long takes, that's there from the beginning with Lewis because it was cheap. If you could rehearse a scene 4, 5, 6 times, get the actors to know their lines, know their blocking, and then film it all in one, you could get rid of 2-3 pages of dialogue in 3 or 4 minutes of shooting time and then be on to the next scene. So if you watch something like So Dark the Night, which he makes in the mid-40s, the first dialogue scene in that film has the pattern of a shot reverse shot. The camera keeps looking over one actor's shoulder while he's talking to another, except the shoulder of whose shoulder we're looking over keeps changing and where the cameras keeps changing, but it's all done in one take. He blocks the actors to create a shot reverse shot pattern, does it all in one shot, and then moves on. So I think that was always part of his vocabulary. There's a climax in a courtroom in a film he did called Secrets of a Co-ed. That's maybe a 3-4 minute single take. It's something that he did rely on in the past. When you get to the big combo, though, what's amazing is almost the entire film is composed of those long takes. Born and Gone Crazy, of course, where they rob the bank from inside the car. That's a classic 3-minute single take as well. So, but I think here, you've got a cinematographer who's willing to go with the director going, if you want to cover this in one, I can do that. And we can do this very fast. And it will look great.
For me, the weakest parts of this whole movie are when they deviate from those long takes. I'm particularly thinking of the scene with John Hoyt as Neil Schreier. There are so many long takes in that sequence of them having this conversation, digging out the information, Diamond doing the proper investigation, and then after Diamond leaves, Hoyt goes over to this bureau that's there and takes out a gun. And there's this really just sloppy insert shot of him taking out the gun. And it's like, what are you doing? And apparently that was at the insistence of the studio. And it's like, oh, come on, guys. This is terrible, because they break up this beautiful long take with this really just, it's not even well shot, this insert, because I couldn't even figure out what he was trying to get when he pulled open this drawer. And I was like, I could have gotten that otherwise. I could have gotten that in the long take, please. You didn't need to break that and give me this just horsey insert shot.
Yeah, maybe that's where the all the extra pages of the script disappeared.
Yeah.
Maybe it was like a 20-minute scene. I trimmed it.
I mean, even in the scene, we've mentioned a few times the scene of Mr. Brown going down on Susan. The way that is shot is gorgeous as well. And they do this thing where she's closer to the camera, he's farther away, and they're having a conversation with each other. He's looking at her, she's looking off screen. So it's this whole idea of being detached. And I love that. And there's so many of those moments in this movie. And then that also sets us up for the close-up of her face as he disappears out of the frame. And it's just, again, economical, fast, gives us so much information, and isn't obtuse.
Move the actors, move the camera, don't cut. It gives the scene an incredible kind of dynamic. There's a tension in the lack of cutting. Sometimes people say that tension is generated through editing. Not in this film, not in a lot of Lewis's films. And he just knew how to block actors. It's a rare gift that not everyone has, and Lewis just shows that you can say so much through mise en scène, and you don't have to keep using the same rather redundant pattern of shot reverse shot that so many Hollywood films of this period rely on. For me, that's why this film always sticks out as being so interesting, so important. It's nice to see a film that's made almost entirely of really complex, well-judged master shots. There aren't many of those. Rio Bravo, maybe, around the same period, but it totally breaks with that classical continuity style that you've become so accustomed to in films of the period, and even now, that it becomes kind of a drudgery. This breaks that for me. It's very fresh. It also provides really stylish things like Richard Conte and Cornel Wilde not really talking face to face. Like, they've got a couple of scenes where they're both facing the camera. Conte is in front. He's not even deigning to show his face to Wilde. It's very contemptuous.
Oh yeah, he won't even talk to him. He has to use Brian Dunleavy to talk to him.
Tell the man I'm going to break him so fast he won't have time to change his pants. Tell him the next time I see him, he'll be down in the lobby of the hotel crying like a baby and asking for a $10 loan.
Yeah, his mouthpiece is deaf. I like that. But there's several of those, and you talked some about shooting over the shoulder. There's a lot of that. There's the scene where McClure tries to recruit Mingo Infante, and you got Mingo's back right at the camera, but just in front of Mingo's back is this lamp. So the lamp isn't drowning out the nice lighting on Van Cleef and Dunleavy, but it's, you just see Mingo's ears sticking out. That's pretty much all you see of Mingo. But I don't know, the over the shoulder stuff and both actors facing the camera, nice touch.
We talk so much about the past in this, and I love that it's not only the past that ends up undoing Mr. Brown, but it's also the subconscious, that it is Susan muttering the word Alicia after she's taken too many pills and is being rushed to the hospital, and it is also Brown doing his own undoing when they give him a lie detector test and start doing word association, and he shouts out the name Bettini when they say spaghetti. And I also love that when we see Bettini finally later on in the film that he's cooking spaghetti. Again, that's a great touch. But, it's these things that are hidden in the subconscious that come up, that bubble up, that end up being the two clues that help Diamond take him down.
Yeah, and the Alicia clue comes from him too. Apparently he was, kind of not really thinking about it and drawing her name in the condensation on a window pane, and that's where she got it. he got self-conscious when he realized what he was doing, and he rubbed it out. But she uncovered that that's what he was writing. Again, so I like that he's still hung up on her. As much as he talks about how he's such a killer, he's such a full of hate and take the other guy down, and you're on top. First is first and second is nobody. When the women tumble after you when you've had the thing, but he's still that's all kind of talk to him because he's still hung up on his wife. That subconscious is what takes him down.
Cornel Wilde maybe isn't the best actor in the world in this movie, but he's got a really good presence. But Richard Conte, he is just remarkable in this, and his face is just terrific. He's got such a great face for this. And I know that they almost had another face. They almost had Jack Palance in this. But I think Conte, the way that he carries himself and the way that he talks, the way that he has that kind of rapid fire patter, it works so well. And I love talking about his face. I love when they eventually capture Diamond and they end up torturing him for a while, trying to find out why he's asking about Alicia and what's going on with this stuff. The way that again is being lit with that really harsh key light from above and the shadows on his face, just the ridge of his brows catches the light so well. And yeah, like I said, that scene was what brought me to this movie, and that scene never disappoints. And again, I like it's this whole idea of taking the hearing aid from Dunleavy and using it as a torture device on Diamond. Such a smart idea, and it brings in that jazz score so well. It's just using jazz as a torture device. I mean, that was me in college right there.
Mingo, who's obviously aficionado, says to Richard Conte, goes, "Just wait a minute. The kid on the drums goes really crazy in a minute." He knows the piece. Yeah.
Brian, you brought up something I hadn't thought about when you were talking about Mr. Brown maybe feeling threatened by Lowell's cultured. He says turn off the classical music, but he turns up the jazz. The big combo gets a boost from him. So. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I thought that was a good insight.
Yeah, the hearing aid torch thing's brilliant, and as they point out, it's like, well, what can the police do? There's not a mark on you, and telling Dunleavy, that's the problem. You never learn technique.
Yeah, because he ends up slapping him, and Brown is like, no, let me teach you how it's done. This took me down a rabbit hole of looking up what's the guy's name, Shorty. Shorty Rogers, I think it is, the guy that does the jazz stuff. I ended up looking at so many of his albums, Shorty Rogers and his Giants, trying to find this exact song. So far, no dice, but hopefully by the time this thing drops, we'll end it off with a flourish. And then, to take that same hearing aid and use it for one of the most striking death scenes. And we've seen people die so many different ways in these movies, but talk about stylish. I just love this death.
It's brilliant. And again, it's however many people had a hand in the script or how much Yordan did, it's good, dramatic foreshadowing. When he says to Dunleavy during the torture scene, he's taking the hearing aid away, and Dunleavy, tries to protect the hearing aid, obviously. And he goes, "Joe, I'm just going to borrow it." And then the next time it's much more permanent. It's a wonderful sequence, but just to cut the soundtrack so completely, he doesn't just shoot Dunleavy's death with a subjective camera. He shoots it subjectively with the soundtrack as well. So we see what Dunleavy sees at the last moment, and we hear what he hears, which is nothing. And you just have darkness illuminated by these incredible muzzle flashes. It's beautiful. I'm not sure how many films that's influenced, but you look at things like Takeshi Kitano's Sonatine, where the final shootout is just entirely with muzzle flashes, or the end of when Paul Newman's killed in Road to Perdition. The way that Conrad Hall shoots that. A lot of films have played around with that notion, but none of them have gone as far as to do this other brilliant thing, which is kill the noise. It's great, and as you say, it's just really inventive. This is a film, even if it's not the greatest noir ever made, but I think it is up there, has so many incredible moments that are just not quite like other films. Other perhaps slightly better films would have moments that were, or less abnormal moments like this. It's really interesting to me, and it's kind of indicative of a period where noir in particular is just getting a little bit more experimental than the mainstream of American cinema. Is this the same year as Kiss Me Deadly? It is 55, right? So, Kiss Me Deadly with the credits rolling the wrong way. Things are just getting a little bit strange. And Night of the Hunter's the same year, 1955. There's something in the air, and noir seems to, really be at the vanguard of interesting Hollywood filmmaking. And they're just full of these strange moments that you're not going to see anywhere else.
Do you think that was because they were low budget often? Do you think it's just artists having to be creative? Does Lewis say, let's do this all in one take because it's great? Or does, Alden say, we don't have much budget to do, it sounded like you were arguing for Lewis there, but I wonder with a lot of this stuff, how much of it is born of the actual financial limitations on these guys having to get really creative, and how much, would be there without. Obviously, Alden lights American in Paris, the really strikingly, it's a big production. This is a
small one, yeah. I think I would never take anything away from John Alden. I think the point I was making really is just that Lewis had been down this road before of we have to shoot this fast. Long takes are quicker. They take longer to rehearse and block. But once you've got them in the can, you've got 2 or 3 pages you can move on. I think he just found the perfect cinematographer. If he'd found Alton earlier, it would have been, a dream combination, I think. It's just a shame that, I think he just works with Alton this one time. I think Alton understood fast, quick, and strikingly minimal. And I think Lewis was the master, or one of the masters of fast, quick, and minimal. And they just spoke the same language. So, I wouldn't know who did what with the compositions and the lighting. I think they're complete. They are the big combo for me here. They are totally simpatico. And it's just, it's the same thing that happens when Stanley Cortez works with Charles Lawton on Night of the Hunter, or Cortez works with Sam Fuller on, Naked Kiss and Shot Quarter. Sometimes you just get a filmmaker who finds a cinematographer who's just crazy enough to follow them down the rabbit hole.
No, I totally agree, because there are plenty of reverse shot scenes in this movie. There are scenes even where it's not typical reverse shot. There's a moment, I think it's of Diamond and Susan talking to each other, and they're shooting these like close up, going back and forth between the two of them, even though they're sitting right next to each other. That might be for acting purposes. I'm not exactly sure, but it's okay. Yeah, we're doing reverse shot. The torture sequence is full of, quick cutting and lots of close-ups of Diamond as he's experiencing this and trying to hide the pain. Or even when it comes to the death of the Brian Dunleavy character, McClure, there's also tons of cuts in that. And, but my God, you're right though, as far as the way that they work together. And there are things where you're like, okay, I'm not exactly sure why you're doing that, but it's so effective. Like, we see Fonte and Mingo with their machine guns in several shots, but then when the death shots actually come, their heads are completely cut off, and it's just those crotch level machine guns going off at Dunleavy, and it's just, oh my goodness, it's so nice. So it could be somebody else holding those guns, but I doubt it. I really think it's the actors doing it.
Shooting stuff with as little light as possible. Alton says it, his tremendous book, Painting with Light, he says that for him, the most beautiful photography is black and white and in a low key. It doesn't get much more black and white in a low key than just lit by muzzle flash.
Well, in that scene, too, where there's a light that seems to be going around, I'm guessing it's from a lighthouse, and it just comes in occasionally. It seems to be on a rhythm, but again, you're keeping with the rhythm of the cutting as well. It doesn't seem like it's out of step with anything else. I want to talk a few minutes about the Alicia character. You mentioned Shock Corridor and just this whole this whole snake pit that they find her in, and she's just, the whole thing of her trying to take care of these flowers and stuff, and she's so gentle with that caterpillar that she finds. I mean, there's just so many amazing touches, and that this actress is only in here for a few moments, but she leaves such an impression. It's kind of like every other character actor that they have in this movie. Like, I keep going back to John Hoyt, but the John Hoyt scene just sings for me. But when they get Helen Walker in here as Alicia, she steals the scenes that she's in.
Yeah, she's great. The scene with them outside by the kind of the bushes is just wonderful. And again, might be one take again. I'd have to go back and remind myself it is. But no, it's a beautifully played out scene. And again, this is something that Lewis was really lucky with this time. He struggled for years working in, B movies, and he didn't always have the best actors. He had a few people he worked with, like Nedrick Young, who were very, very good, actually, and would be in kind of countless Lewis films. But a lot of them, he had kind of B-list scripts and B-list casts. But this time round, while no one in this is a megastar, everyone just makes the most of whether it's their 5 minutes or their 2 minutes or their 80 minutes. And everyone is just so well written in terms of the backstory. And I think if you have a character who's got all this story, you may not be able to talk about it, but you feel as an actor more supported. There's more that you can bring out. And I think it's very much the case with Helen Walker here, that, you only see her once, but the whole plot, a lot of the plot edges on her. When we finally meet Alicia, it's a big deal, and she doesn't disappoint. No, I was very taken by that performance. But as you say, the John Hoyt is great and Jay Adler's great. Everyone kind of gives it their all on this.
One thing that stood out to me this last time, and only the last time that I saw it, is that Diamond's apartment is right across the street from the burlesque house where Rita works. She comes over on her break. When she's killed, it's after she's killed and the cops are standing in the hallway of Diamond's apartment. You can see the burlesque sign right outside. So it's like he really didn't go far to find her.
Well,
he was
fair enough.
Just needed somebody, I guess. But I didn't know what all to make of that. But it just struck me. She's like right across the street. I wish it had worked out for them.
It could just be also just good low budget filmmaking. Is there a neon light?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got a neon light. You've bothered to pay for a neon light. You may as well use the same neon light. I'm saying it's the kind of thing that Lewis would do. But you're right. It's a lovely on a character level that you're right. He didn't stray far to find himself a Rita, but he found a good one. Lewis's films were full of these kind of corner cutting exercises. When you have so little money, if you've paid for a neon sign, you're damn well going to use it as much as is humanly possible. I mean, this is a guy who he made a film with Bela Lugosi in the early-ish, what he's called Invisible Ghost, and they clearly have zero money. So whenever Lugosi turns and goes kind of psychotic, they just literally drop the lighting behind him and up the lighting on his face, and it's kind of like someone's just shining a torch underneath their face in the dark, and then so that the lighting just becomes temporarily unreal. And it's an incredibly effective zero-budget way of doing things. But you watch his other films, there's a bit in So Dark the Night where they clearly don't have a set. So they're trying to magnify the amount of set they don't have by catching a reflection in a window to make it look like there's double the set. And reflection clearly isn't very good. So you see a shot of this woman looking through a window and you don't really see much reflection. And then you see the guy she's looking at in a car, and then it cuts back to her. And if you look really carefully behind her, her room has kind of disappeared, but you don't notice it at first. And what they've done is they've stuck up a black blanket behind her to increase the reflection. And you don't notice because of the way he's framed it. But just to make the most of a tiny budget where they've got one street, he's just come up with this really clever little shorthand. And I think, in a way, that neon light could be that as well. It's like, well, we paid for this damn thing. Now let's stick it in the back of the shot and let's let John Alton use it.
Well, he does use it really great, the burlesque sign, because it's when Fanti and Mingo come to kill Diamond. And of course, they end up getting Rita instead. When they first step into the hallway, there's exactly two lights. There's the exit light, over the door.
Yeah.
It just says exit. And then in a window behind them that you don't even see until it lights up, it says burlesque. And it flashes on them, and then it goes away, and you don't see anything except exit, burlesque, exit.
Really
This nice... you're going to kill the burlesque dancer, aren't they? But it's a beautiful. It's one of my favorite compositions in the whole film.
I don't think we ever see inside the theater other than backstage and her dressing room. So they just keep it super cheap when it comes to that too, because the amount of dressing for a set like that has to be significantly less than actually shooting in a theater.
Completely. You never see you only ever see the backstage, and again, this is very kind of, it's Bresson kind of stuff. You just hear wolf whistles and applause. So it just uses the sound to create the off-screen sound to create the impression of an audience of horny men. It's very good. Yeah,
there's a lot of this movie that could just act like a radio play. Them using, I know this sounds weird, but using sound to kill McClure. I mean, that in itself is just a brilliant thing, that they can pull that sound and we don't even have to hear the sound effects of the machine guns.
Absolutely. I think, you can talk a lot about low-budget filmmaking, but I mean, this has to be one of those movies that anyone wanting to make a film on a budget should be forced to study. But you realize it's the guys who have no money, or working very independently. People like Lewis on the one hand, or on the more art cinema end, you've got your Bressons or people like Derek Jarman who use sound so evocatively to make up for all the money they don't have. And you just want to take money away from big Hollywood studios and say, no, use sound. And because David Lynch says that films it's a 50-50 ratio between images and sound. Most people say, it's a visual medium and sound's like 10%. Lewis kind of shows that Lynch might be right. That so much of this film is done through sound, through not using sound, as in the case of the hearing aid, through, I don't have money to do a burlesque scene, and it's not important to do one either. So, but let's create the illusion that there's a world beyond this one backstage room, and all we need is a bit of sound to do that. And it's great filmmaking, but it's making a film with the ear as well as the eye, and that I think is a lesson a lot of people could learn.
Let's look at that last scene. Talk about low budget. I mean, there are so few things to go into the last scene, so few pieces. There's like an archway, there's a pump, there's two cars, there's a wall, and that's about it. And the rest of it is light and shadow. And I love this whole thing of, we've talked about illumination throughout so much of this. And I know there's parts of like, when they're about to kill McClure, I think he's like, can't you see me? I'm McClure, and just this whole thing of like being seen, and that it is Susan with a spotlight on a car and pointing the spotlight at Mr. Brown. And that's how Diamond is able to see him and dispatch him. It is just remarkable. And like I said, this is the moment. Like if you go and pick up a book on film noir, I think it was Elaine Silver's Encyclopedia of Film Noir. I mean, this is the image on the cover. Yeah, the silhouette of them, I mean, it is just beautiful. And this whole end scene just plays out with pinpoints of light and darkness throughout so much of it. And then the silhouettes of these characters, it is just one of the most beautiful things. And you mentioned Lynch. I mean, this reminds me kind of those scenes of Henry in Eraserhead, where you have that blackness that goes off into infinity, and the way that the light catches those little eraser shavings. It's so gorgeous.
Absolutely. And as you say, there's this, I think it's a lighthouse. You think it's a lighthouse. That single light that just keeps doing the 360-degree turn. So it will briefly illuminate the final scene and give you those silhouettes, and then will disappear and make everything dark again. We don't know if that's a lighthouse because you never see the source of the light. All that's beyond that, as you say, the sort of garage that they're in, is just smoke and fog.
I like that it's an airport. It's an airport.
Right, probably,
There's no airplanes.
Yeah.
I mean, the script is it's an airport. They're going to meet a plane.
Right.
There's no budget. There's no plane. They're not even outside. It's on a soundstage. And I love the saving money by just saying, "Where's the plane?" Richard Conte was like, "Where's the plane? I can't believe he's not here yet." And it's like, "Oh, okay, they're at an airport." Sure, I buy it.
But that fog machine just does wonders as well, because it makes the light have a kind of vision. Fog, smoke makes light visible. That's why film sets are usually saturated with it. But to use it to the point that you've basically just covered everything behind you, it's like, oh, there might be an airport there, but we're not going to see it because it's a very, very foggy day. I love that. I mean, even the airport in Casablanca had more visible stuff than this.
Right.
That's a very small airport.
And it's got a wagon wheel in the background. They didn't have a plane, but they had a wagon wheel up against the corrugated tin.
That's a bizarre thing. This is actually not a joke. Lewis used to have a cart full of wagon wheels, and he used to carry them, basically bring them to every set. And if he couldn't get a good composition with his limited budgets and resources, he would shoot through a wagon wheel. So there were even people in the industry who called him Wagon Wheel Lewis. If you look at Terror in a Texas Town, there's some of the greatest wagon wheel compositions in the history of cinema. But he literally, if he couldn't get a good composition, he had a whole thing of objet that he could put in the foreground to balance and make a good shot. And it's just, I think he just thought, what the hell, I'm going to get my wagon wheel shot in here for no other reason than I've got the bucket of wagon, the box of wagon wheels with me. But he always did it. And it's just interesting that in a non-Western, it kind of intrudes. But watch any of his Westerns, half the shots of streets will be done through a wagon wheel, because it just hides the fact that there's very little depth to the image, because there's like 4 buildings in the set. But that was, sorry, I'd forgotten about that, but that was really his thing.
I love too the use of the corrugated tin in that final shot, because with film noir, of course, Venetian blinds are such a thing, and we get some of that in other shots, but the corrugated tin pretty much does the same effect, just going vertically instead of horizontally.
Horizontally,
Really, really nice thing. I'm trying to think of other films noir with corrugated tin in it that off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but just watching the scene, I'm like, God, that's what a wonderful compositional tool that is.
Absolutely. I mean, it does the same job as you say. So, that's just kind of creating horizontal or vertical shafts of light for atmosphere. It's a really good idea. But I can't think of any other ones that use corrugated tin.
It reminds me of, I think they borrowed it for the end of L.A. Confidential, when he's that shot where he's stepping out of the gunfight at the motel, and the cops are showing up, and he's holding up his badge over the Dudley's body. It's very influential, clearly.
You think of the other great kind of film noir endings of this period. I mean, I suppose in its way, the ending of The Big Heat, where, Gloria Graham dies, but, Glenn Ford manages to take down Lee Marvin, etc. That's kind of the most redemptive. And the end of Kiss Me Deadly is kind of the most awe-inspiringly nihilistic. But if you want to talk about the most beautiful end in noir, it's got to be The Big Combo. It's, and for a genre that, if you want to call it a genre that is predominantly based on its visual style, that's no mean feat then. To say, this is the most visually striking end to a film noir, that's an achievement.
Yeah, because we've seen so many amazing things from the beginning to the end of the cycle, and to be able to pull out certain shots for this and say, I think I wrote in my notes, this is film noir in all caps, because this is the moment where you just go, holy cow, look at this, and you can take that and put it on the cover of a book. You can make a poster out of it. It is just so striking. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back right after these brief messages. I am thrilled to introduce Ovid.tv, the new streaming service for art house films, documentaries, and international cinema. Described by the New York Times as a haven for indie gems, Ovid.tv features films such as Claire Denis' Trouble Every Day, Deborah Granik's Stray Dog, and Raul Ruiz's Time Regained. As a special introductory offer for Projection Booth listeners, you can save 50% off the first 3 months of your subscription. Just head on over to Ovid.tv, that's OVID.tv, sign up with the coupon code PODCAST, and you'll get Ovid.tv for just $3.50 per month for 3 months. The offer expires August 31st, so act now. You'll have access to hundreds of films not available on any other platform, which you can start streaming on all of your favorite devices, such as Apple TV and my personal favorite, the Roku. Once again, go over to ovid.tv, ovid.tv, sign up with the coupon code PODCAST, and you'll get ovid.tv for just $3.50 per month for 3 months. Act now.
Let me ask you a question. Are you getting enough? I bet you'd love more, right? Well, AdamandEve.com wants to give you more with 10 free gifts. First, you'll get a sexy surprise for her. Second, a specially selected toy for him. And third, a little something we know you'll both enjoy. Plus, you'll get 6 full-length adult movies on DVD. And number 10, free shipping on your entire order. So what do you have to do to get your 10 free gifts? It's not hard. Just go to AdamandEve.com and select any one item. It could be an adventurous new toy, sexy piece of lingerie, or anything you desire. Just enter offer code BOOTH at checkout, and you'll get all 10 free gifts. Go check out AdamandEve.com today. Select one item and get 10 free gifts, including free shipping, when you enter offer code BOOTH. That's BOOTH at AdamandEve.com.
It's not easy having a good time, and it's not cheap either. Every week, the Projection Booth brings you a new show, possibly even 2, focusing on all genres of cinema. If you've sat through the 7-hour Conan episode, the 6-hour Star Wars episode, or even the hour-long Superbman episode, you know that Mike and his co-host put forth a lot of work into researching the movies, tracking down the interview subjects, and putting together one of the best podcasts on the internet. Now I'm asking you if you can repay all that hard work by giving back to the Projection Booth. The show has a Patreon fundraiser at Patreon. That's patreon.com/Projection Booth. You can donate as little as $1 a month. That's $12 a year. At least 50 great shows and 2 terrible ones. That's the price of 2 matinee tickets. Now isn't the Projection Booth worth it? Once again, that's patreon.com/Projection Booth. Donate today. It's the right thing to do.
I'm Chris Cooling from Forgotten TV, and you're listening to The Projection Booth, the ultimate movie podcast.
All right, we're back, and we were talking about The Big Combo. We have touched on the cunnilingus scene, but we haven't gone into detail as it was. And I love there's a section of Bogdanovich's book, Who the Devil Made It, where he's interviewing Lewis. And I mean, some of this might be apocryphal. I'm not exactly sure, but according to Lewis, the Susan Lowell character, there was some question as to why would she be with Brown. There was questions from Gene Wallace, why am I going to be with this Conte character? And the quote is from, well, it's not the whole thing from Lewis, is, has it ever occurred to you that you're attracted to this man because of his lewdness, because of his sex relationship, which was so crude? No respectable man is going to love you the way this gangster is going to love you. And then he goes on to talk about how he'll kiss you on the neck, he'll kiss you on the face, he'll kiss you all over, on the tummy, and he won't stop kissing you. And that's when it finally clicked for Gene Wallace, and she realized what he was talking about. And yeah, that's kind of interesting that our main character, or our main female character, is sticking with this gangster because he can please her like nobody else can.
It certainly gives a motivation to the character, because, I mean, otherwise, if this very infamous scene was not in the movie, I think you would have to ask the same question that she was asking. Why is she still with him? You know, I mean, Gene Wallace didn't quite understand, and Lewis kind of explained it in these quite crude terms. If you didn't see that scene as a member of the audience, you would be asking yourself, actually, apart from the fact that she's hopped up on pills, etc., what does she see in this guy? I mean, he's this kind of horrifying misogynist who belittles her and doesn't let her listen to the music that she wants to, and keeps, you know, has Fanny and Mingo tailing her all the time. You know, that you would get out of this relationship if you possibly could as quickly as you. And you know, she's tried to kill herself, but yeah, there's this dark sexual desire in her, and only Richard Conte seems to be able to satisfy it. And of course, what makes it even more interesting is that this is all happening while her husband Cornel Wilde is producing the film.
Yeah, that's the part where I think Eddie Muller is just like, well, I'm not really sure if Cornel Wilde wouldn't have known what was going on with the scene. I don't necessarily buy it. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, I'm not sure if Wilde actually blew up when he saw it later on or not. I imagine that he knew what was happening when it came to this.
Yeah, it could be publicity too. I mean, you know, stir up some interest in people to, Cornel Wilde hated what happened.
That's a clickbait headline.
Hated
you
by
won't believe what happened next.
I mean, I guess it depends which account you read, and obviously you always have to take these things with a pinch of salt, because a lot of the great Hollywood stories are apocryphal. But apparently the censors were also confused by this, because they said, well, you know, you can't show this scene, it's oral sex. It's clearly oral sex, and you know, this is absolutely verboten. And apparently Lewis appeased the censors and Cornel Wilde the same way by saying, no, it can't be oral sex. He's behind her.
So is he tossing her salad then?
You can take this as far as you want to go, really. But it's like, I mean, basically, he could be ribbing her. It's hard to say. But the censors were apparently appeased by the fact that, oh, yeah, I suppose you couldn't really perform oral sex on her if she was facing away from him. I mean, one way or the other, this would have come up to question. I mean, you know, the people at the Breen office would have looked at this and said, I'm really sorry, this is pretty risque, salacious stuff. So I can't see it just passing without comment. So someone had to appease them. So possibly the Lewis story saying it can't be oral sex, he's behind her, is true. It's very interesting if it is. But regardless, this is pretty much the most forward, blunt depiction of oral sex that I can think of in a major Hollywood film that's still made under the Hays Code. It's taboo breaking, if nothing else.
We know that Richard Conte is proud of his technique as he chastises Don Levy for not having any.
Yeah, and you know, absolutely, and it's a film where sex is clearly part of the world. I mean, you know, you have. You have the Rita character, and you know, they're talking about a party for two. What else is that about? But at the very, very beginning of the film, Captain Peterson is offered a 10-cent cigar, and he says, I'm off cigars and brandy. My doctor has basically stopped me from having everything that's fun, or just about. And it's that very important, well, just about. It's like, well, what else is fun that your doctor wouldn't mind you having? It's like, we're clearly entering an adult world where sex is a thing. You know, you have Fante and Mingo and their relationship. You've got, you know, Richard Conte going down on his girlfriend. You've got the police lieutenant with his kind of, you know, stripper girlfriend. You've got the captain talking about how he can have sex, but he can't smoke or drink anymore. This is an adult world, and they managed to play it really well within the limits of what Hollywood censorship would have been at the time. You can look at it now and it doesn't seem coy. And it's not you know, like some of those Otto Preminger films of the 1950s where things like The Moon is Blue, where the word virgin was supposed to be so shocking and now it just looks quaint. This still just seems adult and above board, but actually looks really ahead of its time in places, particularly with the oral sex, you know, gay couple elements of it. So, you know, I think that holds up brilliantly.
Why do you waste your time with a cop?
Could get me a nice rich hoodlum. You should be able to recommend one with your connections.
What is there about a hoodlum that appeals to certain women?
Hoodlums, detectives. Woman doesn't care how a man makes his living, only how he makes love.
There is a really good book that if folks are more interested in this movie, I highly recommend. It is The Films of Joseph H. Lewis, edited by Gary D. Rhodes. And there's a really nice essay on this movie in there that doesn't necessarily get as head up their ass as I like to get, but it covers a lot of good stuff. And you'll be happy to know, Brian, that there is a wagon wheel right on the cover of the book.
I am actually also in that book. My chapter is the one on So Dark the Night. But yes, I am well aware of that book. It's highly recommended. And yes, there is a wagon wheel on the cover.
Nobody has ever quoted me back to me before.
I am really looking forward to reading more of this book, especially about Gun Crazy. And I think I might have to look at next year's schedule and maybe make some changes because I love Gun Crazy and there are so many amazing things about it to talk about.
It's just incredible. Absolutely. And best thing that John Dahl ever did, and Peggy Cummings is fantastic. And it's kind of nice that Lewis is having a little bit of a resurgence, but they're focusing on the right films, I think. There's some early stuff which I said is maddeningly routine, and you can sift through it and you will find some great compositions and some interesting long takes, but that's kind of about it. Whereas when you get to things like So Dark the Night, My Name is Julia Ross, and then onwards, films like Retreat Hell really needs to be looked at again, I think, his war movie with Nedrick Young, Terror in a Texas Town, Gun Crazy, Big Combo. Those are really, really interesting B movies. I mean, like top-notch B movies. And it's so nice that, people like Arrow Academy have done pristine Blu-rays of them. Because
I enjoyed the Holiday Brand, too. I mean, good. It was a pretty intense, emotionally intense, I thought, for one of those. So many of those Westerns kind of slid off my shoulders, but...
Yeah. I mean, like, My Name is Julia Ross, which is a really, it's an interesting little thriller, but Arthur Penn remade that as Dead of Winter. So, I mean, it's a film that people can look back on with great interest. But again, it shows the thing about Lewis is he was clearly always a non-conformist filmmaker. I mean, his last film, Terror in a Texas Town, is basically made by a bunch of people, Sterling Hayden, Nedrick Young, etc., who are basically about to get blacklisted. So they make a film saying, well, we're not going to be able to work in this industry for very much longer. Let's make a film that's personal to us. It's very much like their High Noon. It has that kind of subtext to it. And he agrees to join them knowing that it's going to probably end his career. And he never makes another film, but then just immediately transfers himself to television, where he works pretty much to the end of his life. But, he was not one to play by the rules, and he was certainly not one who enjoyed censorship. I mean, there's a great bit in My Name is Julia Ross where you have to show what a guy who's basically a psychotic killer did to the last woman he kidnapped. And you can't obviously show graphic, detailed murder in a Hollywood movie. So he gets out his flick knife and he's talking to his aunt, I believe it is. And he just goes into this frenzy and grabs a pillow, a very expensive pillow off her sofa. And with the flick knife, he just starts serrating it and gutting it. And it's a brilliant way to talk about what happened to this woman without showing a single act, a drop of blood, really. And he was always thinking about things like that. How can you do something a little bit shocking, a little bit disturbing, but keep it within the rules that the censors, they can't stop you?
It's like Angelica Houston packing a pillowcase with oranges while she's telling Pat Hingle what it's going to do to her when he beats her with this...
Oh, in The Grifters.
Bag of oranges in The Grifters. Yeah, I remember seeing... I mean, the power of that suggestion was so great. I remember seeing a couple of people, I'm not going to mention their names because you'd probably know them and they'd be embarrassed. But I saw them speaking one time about the most gruesome scenes in film noir, and they were talking about that. Oh, yeah, I mean, it was very spur of the moment. What do you think's the most graphic violence or something? And they talked about how horrifying the scene where Angelica Houston gets beat with a pillowcase full of oranges in The Grifters. And I was like, no, there's none of that. It's just her telling what's going to happen as she's packing those oranges in there. And there's no on-screen violence. And in fact, there's no violence. The character doesn't get it at all. But yeah, it's very powerful, and yeah, I'd forgotten about that scene in Julia Ross. The stuffing coming out of the pillow was fantastic.
Before we get off the cunnilingus scene, I wanted to say one more thing, which was the editing by Robert Eisen in this movie is fantastic as well in The Big Combo, and the way that they use the dissolve of her face as she is coming to ecstasy as it dissolves over Cornel Wilde in his office. And I just really appreciate that, the way that they have that nice dissolve, because this movie's got a lot of cuts, but to use the dissolve at that very particular place, I thought was really smart. And they're trying to stretch that out as much as they can.
Just obscure it slightly. And it does actually, the dissolve into Cornel Wilde's office does actually also kind of give you more context for this very strange love triangle that's forming. I think there's that element as well. It's partly psychological, but yes, Lewis is trying to get as much of that close-up of her as he possibly can into the movie.
Yeah, that's probably her most effective acting in that part, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree.
Thinking about sort of slipshod nature of some of the police work that we're supposed to buy, that they can round up every hood in the city in a single night. That's 96 of them, and that Cornel Wilde mentions, just kind of blithely mentions, I got in touch with our overseas military intelligence to get up, some details on this Grazie investigation. I was struck by how, if I hadn't watched this film like 5 times in the last month or so, that probably would have not even occurred to me. I was thinking of this Christopher McQuarrie thing on Twitter. He was watching Die Hard last Christmas, I think, and he was like, you know what? This is not how radios work, how guns work, this is not how any of that stuff works, but this is exactly how movies work. And I was like, yeah, that's it. So, in ways I wanted to think, that's kind of sloppy, that's kind of chintzy, that's cutting too many corners with, but no, that's exactly how movies work. And I bought it. I bought it the first, 4 times this month anyway.
But again, it's that economy of narrative. We don't have time to talk to Interpol for real and have it take, 2 months of paperwork, and you just have to, you'd leave those things out because they're not important. But no, you're right. I hadn't actually thought how ridiculously easy it was to round up every single hoodlum in a major metropolitan area. 96
of them, and pack them into the 93rd precinct.
Yeah.
Lockup, And using the footage from He Walked by Night, which John Alton also shot.
Absolutely.
That whole thing, we have 96 of the criminals, we're only missing 1. And it's like, really? They have really meticulous records. Yeah, it's kind of wild. And I didn't even think about the overseas stuff. But yeah, this whole case spans the globe with the crossing of the Atlantic and, having Alicia allegedly hiding out in Sicily. And really, I'm glad that you brought this up, because some of the things that they do trying to find where Alicia is, there are moments in this where I was almost reminded of Manhunter, where it was like, oh, you're going to look at this picture, and just the forensics of the case are really interesting here in 1955.
Yeah, it's almost like they got the magic police force, the way modern movies have the magic, computer hacker or something like that.
Exactly.
It comes in and just solves monumentally complex problems in a sense.
Enhance. We're almost there. Oh, one more. Oh, it's beautiful. It's perfect. Close up of this.
No pixelization at all, exactly.
This picture of a sign from 500 feet away. Yeah, it's amazing. All right, we're going to take another break, and we're going to play a preview for next week's show.
Mrs. Harper, there's no harm.
She can get along very nicely without you. You're not the kind of person I want Bea to see.
I hope you're not judging by my temporary surroundings, Mrs. Harper. My apartment...
I know the kind of man you are, Mr. Darby. I've gone to the trouble to find out.
She said I had a promise never to see you again. That you weren't interested in me at all. All you wanted was money.
Take a look. A little excitement. Ex-art dealer murdered in Balboa.
Well, what do you know? A murder. Right over on the other side of the highway.
And a murder right here in Balboa.
Some character by the name of Darby.
These are letters which your daughter wrote to the late Ted Darby. The price is $5,000 cash. Ted, darling, I just wasn't alive until I met you. But you came like a fresh wind blowing through my stuffy room. I don't know, Ted, if I can make up my mind to do what you asked yesterday.
I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave. Would you like me to call the police?
I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mrs.
That's right. We'll be back next week with a look at The Reckless Moment. Till then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Jedidiah and Brian. So, Jedidiah, what is happening with you, sir?
Nothing at all. You can follow me on Twitter. If anything happens, I'll let you know there.
You're also good at selling your own stuff. You're like Lloyd Kaufman, just always selling, pitching, riffing about stuff, can never keep you quiet about all the, the things that you've done.
Yeah, if you know what, if you bought my book last time you heard me on the projection booth, go buy it again. There's only the one that's still available. So.
Christmas is coming up, and people need stocking stuffers. Peckerwood is a perfect stocking stuffer.
Yeah, for somebody you really are angry with.
And Brian, what's going on in your world, sir?
Usual stuff, back very much in the trenches of teaching, trying to catch up on some articles I should have written over the summer. My main thing at the moment is actually working on the piece on the William Walton's film music for Laurence Olivier's trilogy of Shakespeare films. It's kind of outside of my usual remit, but it's very, very interesting. And the Dundee University Film Society is currently doing a season dedicated to the favorite films of John Waters. So that's a lot of fun. So everything from William Castle to Bergman, with lots of stuff in between.
Waters used to do, it was the Saturday night screening of the Maryland Film Festival every year, and they would allow him to pick something and introduce it and do a Q&A after. And I think partially because it was John Waters, but also partially because they were films that we never would have seen otherwise. That screening always sold out. And there were so many good things I still think about and talk about today. So I can't even imagine what kind of great stuff you're showing over there.
Just got hold of his copy of Joseph Losey's Boom, which actually has a commentary by Waters, which is a thing of beauty. But yeah, really interesting. Otto Preminger with Bon Tristesse coming up, and as I said, some Andy Warhol and Andy Warhol Kenneth Anger night. It's going to be interesting. Fassbinder, Woody Allen, properly eclectic.
Yeah, he showed us Baxter, the Belgian killer dog movie. What's the one? The Cat with Two Heads, which was more of a French porn film. There's one called Lovers, I think it was, with Catherine Deneuve's daughter, and it was a threesome movie that was also a musical, and it was just wonderful stuff. And like I said, things I had seen Baxter before, but otherwise things I never would have seen. And seeing Baxter on the big screen, what a treat.
No, as he said, to have to make films in bad taste, the first thing you need is impeccable taste, and he's right. So.
Well, thank you again, guys, for being on the show. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Please head on over to the website, projectionboothpodcast.com, where you can find out more about today's episode. You'll also find a link over to Patreon, where you can make a donation to the show. Every donation we get helps the Projection Booth take over the world.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.